This is video number 2, the read and commentary of the Apocalypse of Adam. In our first 2 videos, we came to understand Adam had a dream, was met in person, or had some kind of vision whereby he met 3 men. Those 3 men provided an apocalyptic account of things to come, as Adam was the first physical man formed along with Eve that was later kicked out of the garden. These 3 men had informed Adam there would be 3 sons Adam would have, Abel, Cain, and then ultimately Seth. Of course, the story is that Cain slew Abel, and then Cain was sent to the land of Nod, which some translate to mean the land to the north. Where he goes exactly, no one really knows, but there are some scholars speculate he may have intermingled with the Gentiles. This is setting up an implied account about people that existed outside of the Hebrew. And again, if we know the creation story, Genesis chapter 1 suggests that man was created in the image of God, he and she, him, created he and she. Meaning, in other words, they took upon the attributes of male and female. And they lived on average to be roughly 1,000 years. Then comes along the Lord God in chapter 2 of Genesis, who then creates a human out of the soil, but was not able to animate it. But then Sophia comes to visit and assist with the animation of this being by persuading the demiurge to take his own gnosis, which is the light that allows life to be animated, and breathe into Adam. And then, of course, Adam comes to life. But in the process, then, the demiurge loses his gnosis, along with all of his dominions, the archons. Thereafter, it's told through the Gnostic lens and the Bible, the demiurge puts Adam into a kind of stupor or sleep. And then he takes the feminine aspect from the male aspect of Adam, and he divides the two, puts them asunder. And that's the nature of things up to today. And this really is the backdrop of which the 3 men imply. The people lived what they call the Great Generation, may imply a kind of Atlantis. And this knowledge was handed down by a kind of Prometheus to the son of Prometheus, Decleon, who some say in Gnosticism is referring to Noah. At least the Gnostic text outlines this. And that in the time of Atlantis, again, men lived side each other, looking at each other as equal. No hierarchy. There was no fear. They believed in the eternal true father and mother in the skies, or beyond the skies, the God within. This went on for a long time. And then eventually the seed of Noah was caught up into a flood, and there is some speculation the flood wasn't encircling the whole earth, but was encircling the whole world of the Hebrews and the surrounding lands. And the Gentiles lived outside, was not affected by the flood. The great people, or the great generation of those perfect people, of which 3 men came from that tribe of people, lived peacefully for 600 years after the flood, until the progeny of Noah stumbles upon them, when Jehovah informs Noah to spread his seed. And so Noah claims Jehovah has promised that the entire earth will be given to Noah and his lineage, and separated into 3 parts between his 3 sons. Those sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, Ham and Japheth are sent out to form different nations. Ultimately, they form 12 nations. They stumble upon the sacred number of 13, which is the 13th great nation, the great nation that had the eternal knowledge, the Gnostic knowledge. They were a Gnostic nation. For a while, they lived in peace. All 400,000 seed of Ham and Japheth lived alongside, were invited peacefully to sojourn with the great nation. The great nation invited them to do so. But as time went on, the archons and the powers that be and the demiurge, Jehovah, has stirred up all kinds of trouble to create division, because he would not have this eternal knowledge shared when he got wind of it. Eventually, he was able to manipulate them to, that is the seed of Ham and Japheth, to start to bring some of these people from the eternal nation to council and start to accuse them of all kinds of slander and wrongdoing and things that they were not responsible for. This eventually led to war, then also eventually led to a great calamity, a kind of catastrophe. You could think of it a kind of a violent war. Some may even suggest a nuclear Holocaust level war. Well, many millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people, were wiped out. But thankfully, the 3 aeons from the Pleroma had come down and rescued a handful of the eternal nation, or the Gnostics, whisked them away safely. And so the concern was by the Father, Mother, and the Aeon, Christ and Sophia, man was then left with no gnosis. But, thankfully, the knowledge was passed on secretly through the lineage of Seth, which is of the tribe of the Hebrews. And Seth carried it through Japheth, Ham, and Shem, and various different people that was entrusted with this knowledge. And eventually, this knowledge, of course, allowed those between the time of Noah and the time of Christ's arrival to have access to gnosis and Sophia, wisdom. And then this allowed people to continue to ascend beyond the realm of the Kenoma during that period. The Illuminator does arrive during this period. There are 3 of them, and the third one arrives, and eventually this is during the period of the 12 great nations, or the 3 nations, 12 nations that were set up. In total, 13, because the 13th nation is the sacred nation, or the hidden nation, which then, of course, Western culture considers to be a bad number. Of course, everything that really is considered spiritual knowledge is topsy-turvied and turned upside down for a reason. That 13th nation is also the constellation Ophiuchus, which is the constellation of the serpent. And recall that Christ compared himself to a serpent, and to even go so far as to advise us to be as gentle as doves and wise as serpents. And remember, the serpent appeared in the garden, and Noah lifted up a serpent in the desert. A serpent is the symbol of wisdom and knowledge. You see, all of this is the Ouroboros. It's just the symbol of eternal life. At the same time, it's also a symbol of entrapment, as the snake is eating its own tail. Enactment of eating its own tail creates an inner circle. That's the realm of the Kenoma. Ultimately, the goal here is that we will have what's called consummation, or consuming of the ages, meaning we will consume all 12 of the zodiac signs in its totality. And that is what's called the consummation of the ages. And once that's done, the snake would have eaten itself, and there will be no more serpent, or the realm of the flesh orientation. Releasing of the blood and the flesh, the wine and the bread, which is the Last Supper. And then that releases humanity from that inner circle. And all things were kept sacred in that inner circle. The outer circle, the snake representing the husk. And you can see the snake continually shedding its skin to remind us of this fact. This book really is outlining how this eternal knowledge was salvaged. The demiurge and his minions are constantly on the lookout. And you can see they're not omnipotent or omniscient or omnipresent. Otherwise, they wouldn't constantly be stumbling around trying to find out where this knowledge is and trying to extinguish it. Thankfully, thoughts are held sacred unless we invite the archons and the demiurge and the god of this world into our mind by invitation through prayer or whatever we're having to do, or connecting through mediumship. But otherwise, they have no privy to that. But they can sense our emotions. They can certainly sense our intentions, instinctually, instinctively, spiritually. So this is what you want to keep in mind. Now let's go on and pick up where we left off. Now, what happened after that great calamity, that great catastrophe? Well, there were 2 of them. The first one was the flood, and the second one was this sort of nuclear holocaust. The third one, of course, comes at the death of Christ. There's all these attempts throughout time, but the big ones, those are the 3 big ones. After that great calamity, the great war, some of the eternal knowledge people, or the Gnostics, were taken away and to be safeguarded. Another Illuminator appeared. Now, who that Illuminator is exactly is not specified. It could be that it was Christ who visited again. And remember, the Gnostic text shows Christ visits Earth 3 times. And of course, we know of the garden, and we know of when he appears as the man Jesus. But there's a lot of speculation about what's that third one. And this text implies, at least I believe, that that's the second one, which is he walked among people for a time. He may have come in many different forms, or perhaps he was one human or spiritual being that walked among men for for thousands of years. Not really clear, but he's called the Illuminator. And this Illuminator goes about, educates these different 12 kingdoms. And every one of these kingdoms recognize that he is born of water. And remember, in the Pleroma, there are two essential essences, and they are the essence of all living things, which is water and light. They know that he comes from water because this is something the Gnostics carry with them. Between this realm and the Pleroma is water that separates us, basically. Everybody that comes into this realm goes through water, and that's what the baptism is about. We're dunked into the water, and when we have a revelation that we can't survive under the water forever, then we are brought back up so that we may breathe. And then we're, of course, purified, and we go back to where we originally came from. We originally above the water, where we were intended to be, and where we could breathe freely, and then we're dunked in the water to be purified, and then brought back up. That's this symbolic baptism. Christ is thought to have come as Sophia as well, out of the Pleroma into the Canoma, and that's what's being referred to when they talk about he's from the water. So let's pick up where we left off. These 12 kingdoms that Ham and Japheth would eventually form from their physical seed, but carry within it, chosen few, the spiritual seed, the Gnostic wisdom, what's called the eternal knowledge. We left off when Abraxas, Sablo, and Gamaliel had descended and taken these Gnostics out of the fire and the wrath and whisked them away. And then the Illuminator shows up a third time in order to leave a seed of Noah and the sons of Ham and Japheth. This is where Noria is carrying this knowledge into the future, to leave for himself fruit-bearing trees. And this is left behind because this nation was wiped out, basically, and some of them were salvaged and taken away off Earth back to the higher realms. So these aeons from the Pleroma came into this realm to have sacred teachings about this knowledge, to select people within the seed of Ham and Japheth. And this is what allows it to continue. And this is where we left off. That was among those 12 nations. But of course, the god of the powers heard about this and got very disturbed. And he says, what is the power of this man who is higher than we? And he starts to hear about the Illuminator, and he gets very disturbed. And he eventually arouses great wrath against this man. And the glory will withdraw and dwell in holy houses which it has chosen for itself. And the powers will not see it with their eyes, nor will they see the Illuminator either. Then they will punish the flesh of the man upon whom the Holy Spirit came. And of course, you know the story that Christ was crucified, and he was punished, of course. But whether this is 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked and he became the first to beget the Christ, or was actually Christ embodying as a man, being called the Illuminator, is not clear. But that is not as important as to understand how this knowledge is being carried down sacredly through time, because it's the only hope that humanity really has. Then the angels and all the generations of powers will use the name and era, meaning they'll begin to use this truth about Christ and use his name and era and wrongfully bring out, the only way you can is sin, and you have to forgive your sins, and you're bad and you're wretched, and all these things, some things that Christ never talked about. They'll deceive many millions of people. The nations as a whole will recognize this person was actually holy and pure, even though they rallied on the whole, worked up in a frenzy and persecute him and eventually kill him. And so it goes on to say, now the first kingdom says of him that he came from ... a spirit ... to heaven. Now, it's not clear what, this is fragmentary, so we don't know for certain, but there are other things that suggest that it's talking about he came from the Pleroma. And he was nourished in the heavens. He received the glory of that one and the power. And that one is the mother father. He came to the bosom of his mother, which is Barbella, which is the mother part of the father, counterpart to the father. And thus he came to the water. The second kingdom says about him that he came from a great prophet. And so everybody's trying to figure out who was this great man that gave all these incredible teachings. Now, of course, the most sacred part of those teachings was given to a select few, like Seth and Noria, for example. But on the whole, he still went about to proclaim what we would consider as the good news. And so people started to talk after he was persecuted, try to figure out, okay, who is this man, and where did he come from? And a bird came, took the child who was born, and they say this he was a prophet, and brought him onto a high mountain, and he was nourished by the bird of heaven. And an angel came forth there. He said to him, Arise, God has given glory to you. He received glory and strength, and thus he came to the water. In Gnosticism, again, we're talking about when we're coming through water, or the waters separate the waters, a firmament above and below the waters of life, and coming into the water, or coming out of the water, or going into the water, through baptism, these kinds of things. This is all referring again to one of the essential essences of the Pleroma. So he came to the water. So he came from the Pleroma through the water into this realm. So the third kingdom says of him that he came from a virgin womb. And of course, this is reminiscent of Mary, right, in the Immaculate Conception. He was cast out of his city and his mother. He was brought to a desert place. He was nourished there. He came and received glory and strength, and thus he came to the water. The fourth kingdom says of him that he came from a virgin. Solomon sought her, he and Phersolo and Saul and his armies, which had been sent out. Solomon himself sent his army of demons to seek out the virgin, and they did not find the one whom they sought, but the virgin who was given them. It was she whom they fetched. Solomon took her. The virgin became pregnant and gave birth to the child there. She nourished him on a border of the desert. When he had been nourished, he received glory and power from the seed from which he was begotten, and thus he came to the water. Light refers to gnosis, whereas water refers to wisdom, and water is referring to the cleansing, the purification of all ignorance and missing the mark of understanding. So water is understanding, it's memory, it's intuition, it's instinct, it's the soul orientation, whereas the light is the spiritual orientation. And the fifth kingdom says of him that he came from a drop from heaven. He was thrown into the sea. So all these kingdoms, they're just basically it's really round up this all kinds of conversation about who is this Illuminator. The abyss received him, gave birth to him, and brought him to heaven. He received glory and power, and thus he came to the water. Now the most important thing out of all of this is they all agree he comes from the water. And the sixth kingdom says that, down to the aeon, which is below, in order to gather flowers. She became pregnant from the desire of the flowers. She gave birth to him in that place. The angels of the flower garden nourished him. He received glory there and power. Thus he came to the water. Now, notice these are very illustrative and metaphorical, and they're all fantastical, almost mythological. But they're all trying to find some way to explain this in a metaphysical way, because this man was beyond anything they could understand on a very mundane level. And the seventh kingdom says of him that he is a drop. It came from heaven to earth. Dragons brought him down to caves. He became a child. A spirit came upon him and brought him on to high to the place where the drop had come forth. He received glory and power there, and thus he came to the water. And the eighth kingdom says of him that a cloud came upon the earth and enveloped a rock. He came from it. The angels who were above the cloud nourished him. He received glory and power there, and thus he came to the water. And the ninth kingdom says of him that from the 9 muses one separated away. She came to a high mountain and spent some time seated there, so that she desired herself alone in order to become androgynous. She fulfilled her desire and became pregnant from her desire. Now, this is interesting, again, because it refers back to the understanding by Gnostics. You don't need male and female to copulate in order to have pregnancy. This is actually shown in nature, very rarely, but it does sometimes happen, spontaneous birth. What in spiritual context would be called, or parallel would be called, immaculate conception. But again, it isn't women that need men, but it's men that need women in order to be part of a coupleship, because women have a womb and therefore can carry a spontaneous birth. And so he was born this way, through desire. The angels who were over the desire nourished him, and he received glory there and power, and thus he came to the water. The 10th kingdom says of him that his God loved a cloud of desire. He begot him in his hand, and cast upon the cloud above him some of the drop, and he was born. He received glory and power there, and thus he came to the water. Now the other thing to keep in mind is the parallel, that there being total of 13, which parallels again the total number of zodiac signs. There actually are 13. And each of these, if studied in depth, could be referring to each of the zodiac signs and having some kind of symbolic meaning behind them relating to those signs. So something to think about. And then the 11th kingdom says that the father desired his own daughter. This is something you would see in the Bible, of course, and these people, the Hebrew, think this way, of course, because it was perfectly natural for many of them. And you remember that even, I believe, one of the daughters slept with, was it Lot or Noah? I can't remember, when they had drunken him, because they wanted to make a baby with the father. So in today's world, we would find this very egregious and taboo and wrong, but in that time, it was considered sort of the last resort, or something very rare or uncommon, but it wasn't something that was necessarily looked down on because, again, population was much, much more sparse, and there were all kinds of tribal warfare, and they wanted lots of children to till the soil and to make a lot of army, and so it wasn't necessarily completely approved of or completely disapproved of. Let's put it that way. She cast ... tomb out in the desert. The angel nourished him there, and thus he came to the water. The 12th kingdom says of him that he came from 2 illuminators. He was nourished there, he received glory and power, and thus he came to the water. And the 13th kingdom says of him that every birth of their ruler is a word, and this word received a mandate there. He received glory and power, and thus he came to the water in order that the desire of those powers might be satisfied. And this 13th one is actually the one that he actually comes from. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and was God. The Word became flesh and walked among men, and men knew it not. And so this is how he was birthed. Through the ruler is a word, and this word received a mandate there. And he received glory and power, and thus he came to the water. In order that the desire of those powers, and those powers are the archons, that have this itch, right, that needs to be fulfilled. They're archons, and that is to satisfy that itch. Now, it isn't specifically he comes here for that reason. Now, we're all part of the archon, the archway, the archetypes that we live out. We are fulfilling that desire to know what it's like to love the Father. Even though the Father and Mother didn't originally create us for that purpose, it was to understand not only how to love the Mother Father, but to be loved by the Mother Father. But in the beginning, the Mother Father had emanated us, loved, and that we loved. And that was just it. There was no hierarchy. There was no, I'm not worthy to be loved, nor am I worthy to love you because, I can't even look at you, that kind of thing. But the generation without a king over it says that God chose him from all the aeons. He caused a knowledge of the undefiled one of truth to come to be in him. He said, out of a foreign air from a great aeon, the great Illuminator came forth, and he made the generation of those men whom he had chosen for himself shine, so that they could shine upon the whole aeon. And so he selected, again, just as he did the 12 disciples, to spread this gospel, this good news about the Gnostic knowledge. And so then the seed, those who will receive his name upon the water, and that of them all, will fight against the power, and a cloud of darkness will come upon them. So this truth they'll try to spread, and fight is not in a warring sense, but it's in a spiritual warfare. And they would try to spread this knowledge. The seed is spiritual nature, not a physical seed. But then the powers of darkness will, of course, come after them, as they always do. Then the peoples will cry out with a great voice, saying, blessed is the soul of those men, because they have known God with the knowledge of the truth. And then, of course, it's always after the fact. They realize that, oh, wow, these people were blessed by God, and they had this great knowledge, and they really were good people. And look what we have done. They shall live forever, because they have not been corrupted by their desire, along with the angels, nor have they accomplished the works of the powers. Of course, the works of the powers is when you just sort of give in, you sell your soul, become a kind of harlot or a prostitute to this world by selling the seed, the accomplishment that is waiting to be within you, and you give that away, off to go and become whatever you're trying to get. Lots of money, lots of fame, lots of sex, lots of adoration, whatever it happens to be. You're trading in the reason you're here. You're a seed. You're trying to avoid the work, whatever it happens to be. That is what that's talking about. Nor have they accomplished the works of the powers. So they don't accomplish the work of the power, they accomplish their own work, you see. But they have stood in his presence in a knowledge of God like light that has come forth from fire and blood. But we have done every deed of the power senselessly, And so they'll reflect back on their behavior, right? And they'll realize they killed these men, these women, these people that had the Gnostic knowledge and wisdom. And they'll see how senseless it was what they did. But we have done every deed of the power senselessly. We have boasted in transgression of all our works. We have cried against the God of truth, because all his works ... is eternal. These are against our spirits. For now we have known that our souls will die the death. And that's the thing. That's what the Revelations refers to, the eternal lake of fire, as the second death. And the eternal lake of fire just referring to being recycled into this realm where you're constantly burning with lust for the things of the flesh, not the things of the soul or the mind or the spirit. And you just keep getting recycled. For now we have known that our souls will die the death. So not only your physical body will die, but your soul will die, and you'll be recycled. And you'll have to start all over again as a little baby. And that's how it works according to the Gnostic understanding. Then a voice came to them saying, Maku and Makar and Nasunas, who are over the holy baptism and the living water. Why were you crying out against the living God with lawless voices and tongues, without law over them, and souls full of blood and foul deeds? So in other words, these three will come to the people and say, why are you crying out? You've done this, so why are you crying over your own behavior? You are full of works that are not of the truth, but your ways are full of joy and rejoicing. Having defiled the water of life, you have drawn it within the will of the powers to whom you have been given to serve them. You're going to basically get your karma. You're going to get the karma from the archons and the demiurge. They're going to judge you. They're going to be your God, and they're going to judge you when you die. You're going to go before that judgment, because you're not going to be able to escape it, because you gave your moral agency to them, and they have a right then. You've given them a right, like a consent form. You signed it off. Said, yeah, you have a right to do whatever you want with me, because I agreed that I will get from you whatever you promise me if I do whatever you say. And so that's what's going on here. And then so now you'll just get recycled, and they'll just do whatever they're going to do with you. And your thoughts is not like that of those men whom you persecute, ... desire ... Their fruit does not wither, but they will be known up to the great aeons, because the words they have kept of the God of the aeons were not committed to the book. And the book is like things like the Bible, or whatever your dogmatic text is, that you have to adhere exactly to this. And of course, it's our cherry-picked version or interpretation of it, and that varies from church to church to church, and religion to religion, denomination to denomination. You have to follow exactly as we say, that book. And of the God of the aeons were not committed to the book, and so these people didn't commit themselves to the letter of the law, nor were they written. But the angelic beings will bring them, whom all the generations of men will not know, for they will be on a high mountain, upon a rock of truth. Therefore they will be named the words of the imperishability and truth. And the words of imperishability is that whatever intention you have, that voice within you, being made flesh, and truth being that thing that is ever constant, which is the essence of the Mother Father, which is all light and all pure water, the waters of life, that is feeding all of eternity. For those who know the eternal God in wisdom and knowledge and teaching of angels forever, for he knows all things. And again, it's implying that the Old Testament God is not the true God. It's a false God. It's a kind of Satan. That's what you want to understand. These are the revelations which Adam made known to Seth, his son, and his son taught his seed about them. And this is the lineage. He taught Seth because he wanted Seth to understand one of his progeny, Noah, would get misled by the Old Testament God and be swept away in the flood and go after this generation of Gnostics and try to destroy them. But Seth would safeguard this, because Adam warned him through these three men visiting Adam, whether it be in a dream or a vision, who knows. And Adam sits down and tells Seth, okay, you've got to safeguard this knowledge. And we got this knowledge from, the Garden of Eden, and of course the knowledge of tree of good and evil. And his son taught his seed about them. This is the hidden knowledge of Adam, which he gave to Seth, which is the holy baptism of those who know the eternal knowledge through those born of the Word, and the imperishable illuminators, who came from the holy seed, Jesus, Mazarus, Jesedicus, the living water. And of course this is saying Jesus of Nazareth, the living water. That is the living water. Jesus, Mazarus, Jesedicus. Right? And so that ends this particular text, the Apocalypse of Adam. It also ends the 5th codex of the 13 total codices, and we'll be picking back up in our next video the first text among the 6th codex, which is entitled The Acts of Peter and the 12 Apostles. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, have a blessed day.